Now, I've been a wrestling fan since the early 90s, and honestly, there aren't a lot of stories that I hear these days that I haven't heard already. But every once in a while, I hear something that I just didn't know about, and I love that. So today I thought I'd share a few wrestling stories that some of you might not know. You might not know that WCW actually had a mascot. The promotion always tried to present itself like any other sporting event on TV at the time, from Michael Buffer to the Nitro Girls. But a lot of people didn't notice the grown man running around dressed as a giant cat. His name was Wildcat Willie. You know, WCW. And he was rarely seen on TV, but if you ever went to an event live, you could spot him running around near the stage area or ringside. I'm sure you all know who Ric Flair is, but you might not know that even though his legal name is Richard Flair, that's not his birth name. He was born on February 25, 1949 in Memphis, Tennessee, and was adopted at 3 weeks old. Various documents of him as a baby show the name Fred Phillips, Fred DeMarie, and Fred Stewart. Though it's unclear which last name was his birth name for sure, it's a given that he was in fact named Fred. I don't know. Fred just doesn't seem right. You might also not know that Ric Flair survived a plane crash. On October 4, 1975, Flair was a passenger in a twin-engine plane on a flight from Charlotte to Wilmington, North Carolina. Riding with Flair that night was wrestling promoter David Crockett, as well as professional wrestlers Tim Woods, Bobby Bruggers, and Johnny Valentine. As the plane approached the airfield, it ran out of gas, cutting through trees before plummeting to the ground. Everybody survived the crash, but the wrestlers were beat up pretty bad. Flair broke his back in 3 places and was told he would probably never wrestle again. Luckily for Flair and for wrestling fans all over the world, he recovered from the incident and by 1976 was back in the ring. Diamond Dallas Page wrestled Christian in a European Championship match at WrestleMania 18. But you might not know that this wasn't Page's first WrestleMania appearance. In 1990, DDP auditioned for the WWF as an announcer but never got the job. He was, however, offered a chance to appear at WrestleMania 6, and on April 1, 1990, that's exactly what Page did. Greg Valentine and the Honky Tonk Man known as Rhythm and Blues rode to the ring in a classic pink Cadillac, with the driver being none other than Diamond Dallas Page himself. Vince McMahon purchased WCW in 2001, but you might not know that Vince already owned the company once in the past. In 1982, Georgia Championship Wrestling had a weekly television show by the name of World Championship Wrestling. As the WWF expanded, Vince decided that his one wrestling time slot on the USA Network wasn't enough and he wanted another, the one belonging to Georgia Championship Wrestling, the only other wrestling show on network TV at the time. So, in an attempt to monopolize the industry, McMahon offered to purchase the time slot from Ted Turner, the owner of the TBS network. Ted, not being a fan of Vince McMahon and his style of wrestling, denied McMahon the time slot. McMahon, being the businessman he was, decided that if he couldn't purchase the time slot, he would just buy GCW outright. McMahon now owned the Saturday night time slot that he wanted so badly, but things didn't turn out as planned. The show was a disaster from the start, and fans were calling TBS left and right asking where their Georgia Championship Wrestling went. The WWF had a very unique style of wrestling at the time, creating over-the-top gimmicks and storylines, while GCW was more of your traditional wrestling. Ratings plummeted, at which point Ted Turner, who was furious over the drop in ratings, decided to take action. He ended up giving time slots to other wrestling promoters on the same network, which angered Vince as he was under the assumption that he would be the only wrestling show on TBS. Both of the other promotions beat the WWF in ratings. After losing the battle and losing a lot of money, McMahon decided to sell the World Championship Wrestling program to Jim Crockett Promotions, who would turn around and later sell it to Ted Turner, and well, the rest is history. Many people know Sable for her run in the WWF in the late 90s, but you might not know that she appeared on an episode of WCW Nitro in 1999. In June of that year, Sable quit the WWF and filed a lawsuit against the company for sexual harassment and unsafe working conditions. That very same month, Sable appeared in the audience on an episode of Nitro. They never addressed her by name, but they did mention that you never know who would show up at a Nitro. Usually in the past, when a wrestler would show up in the crowd of a WCW event, it usually led to a storyline involving that wrestler, which makes this situation a little unusual as Sable was never seen or talked about again in WCW. There's no doubt that the WWE is a powerhouse, but you might not know that the company wasn't doing too well in 1997 and was reportedly close to going under. Vince McMahon, among others, have even confirmed this in interviews. As WCW Nitro was dominating Raw in the ratings war and ticket sales were down for the company, the WWF was struggling to remain profitable. Shortly after locking up Bret Hart into a 20-year contract in 1996, which, by the way, would have ended this year, Vince had to back out of the contract, explaining to Bret that he just couldn't afford it. Many argue that there's no way the WWF was even close to going out of business due to the fact that Mike Tyson was paid $3 million for his WrestleMania appearance, but many have speculated that this was the last of the WWF's money and they were banking on this last-ditch effort to get back on their feet. It's still somewhat unclear on how close the WWF exactly was to going out of business, but if it is in fact true, then it makes the Monday Night Wars victory that much more incredible. If you enjoyed the video, click that like button and subscribe, and if you didn't like the video, well, I'm sorry, I tried. These are kind of hard to do sometimes, but I don't know. Maybe next time?